Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our final day of the User Conference 2020. We've got 4 more wonderful training sessions for you. So hopefully you'll enjoy these topics and learn a little bit more about our product. To kick us off, we're going to have Aaron. So Aaron and I, like we kind of joked about, have swapped roles. Today I'll be your host, and Aaron will be doing a presentation. He's going to be talking to us a little bit about Asset Manager. And how to use it in practice. So actually being able to apply it, since it's a relatively new feature that came out in version 7. So I would say without too much further ado, let's go ahead and get started with Aaron's presentation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me for our user conference training session. I'm going to be going over the DataPark Asset Framework and kind of working at the Asset Manager in practice. Now that we've had it sitting out here for a year or so and some users will start using it, let's kind of reintroduce ourselves to some of the training and how to use it and how it's going to function with ParkView and DataPark in practice. So I'm going to go over building an equipment type. I'm going to make a pump. I'm going to configure that equipment, so I'm going to add properties to that pump and different values for it. I'm going to create an instances of that pump, so many pumps in the system to match ones in my virtual setup. We're then going to go and organize them in our hierarchy, so put them into our process, a unit op tree, and then I'm going to show how you access them from ParkView. So what's it like once you have assets built up? What's it going to be like to view them, and what ways can you see them in ParkView? I'm going to show creating an equipment-based formula. So that would be going back to my pump and make a new property that would be a calculated property. And then we'll look at building equipment-aware displays. So displays that are being smart about equipment, letting you pick a context. And then we'll return again and do modifying and extending an existing piece of equipment. So you already have it configured, it's maybe lived out there for a while, and you want to add a new property or modify it some. So let's get into accessing the Equipment Manager, how you're going to find the Equipment Manager in 7.0. So the version of ParkView I'm using is our latest version of 7, and we've added the Equipment Manager to our Tools menu. But of course, you can always find it by going to the Start menu and typing Asset, or heading off to the ParkView folder and finding it as an application in there. So I've recorded a number of short videos that I'm going to talk over to kind of walk us through the different steps I'm going to go over. So in ParkView, up on the ribbons, we have our Tools ribbon, our Displays ribbon, and there we have Asset Manager. And it will ask you to log in, unless you have the Remember Me checked off, because there is additional security on the Asset Manager. So you can choose who you want to have access. So once we're in there, we have the buttons across the top, and we're going to be working with the equipment hierarchy and the equipment tab. And the equipment tab or window is where we're going to get into configuring things. And as you see, this is an empty system, but we do include some initial types, a pump type, a motor, loop types are all included initially when you just install 7.0 and get the asset framework. So now we're going to go and build a new equipment type. So I'm going to want to make my pump in the system that might be slightly different than the default pump we include in the system. So to do that, I'm going to go back to my equipment tab where I have things set up. And we can see we already have a pump type, but I want to add a new subtype and expand on it. So right click on the type you want to add, choose subtype, and then you type the name in. And once you hit save, it will make a subtype of it. And subtypes always inherit any properties in the parent type. So equipment ID and housing material are already there. So now I'm going to start making my properties. So my pump's going to have a flow, pressure inlet, pressure outlet, and I'm going to add speed. And that'll be like impeller speed or RPM there. So I create my 4 properties. And then we can choose our data types. And my data types are going to be all doubles because they're all going to be coming from tags or maybe a constant. But they could be singles, It could be enumeration, something you pick from a list. But since mine will be coming from tags, I'll have them be doubles, which is the default in here. Now we have our value. I don't need to set my value right now because I'm going to set them as I build all my instances where I assign the tags. But values could be constants, formulas, or tags. And once you build the instances, you can change those from a formula to a tag or a constant. But initially I can leave them all blank because we'll be assigning them as we create our actual instance of it. So next we're going to do is set up the trend order, and that was the grid below the properties grid. And what the trend order is if you're in Datapark and you want to just say trend pump number 1 or trend compressor number 7, or something like that, it will only trend the tags that you pre-pick down there. So your piece of equipment could have many, many properties. Some are intermediate, some are calculation properties, but you only want 4 or 5 to show up when somebody just says trend this piece of equipment. So you can set those using that window down there. So to do that, we go below the grid to our trend order section. And that's where we're going to pick the tags that when somebody says trend my pump or pump 7, it will just pick those. So again, you go down to the grid, and where there's an asterisk, that's always our blank row that we want to pick. And we come down there and click in there, and we'll get a pull down. And then you kick the values and the order that you would want them to trend. So right now, if I go choose trend asset when I'm in ParkView or Datapark, it will trend the flow, pressure inlet, and outlet in that order in that trend. So that way the user doesn't get equipment ID, housing material, maybe speed, maybe some SOPs or intermediate values. They only get the ones that you as a designer would like them to see. So the next step is now we're actually going to build our equipment instances. We've built our model or our equipment type, and we've configured a couple properties for it. Now we actually want to build a pump, and then the pump will actually represent in a way, a location in the process where, where this pump is going to be and what tags it has. So if we head down there, it's the same window. We're just going to be there around properties. And instead of properties, we're going to go over to the equipment tab. And this is where we set up and configure any of the equipment. And you find a blank row and start typing. So we're just going to call ours pump 01. And I can go to the next field, which is description. So here I can give it a longer, more descriptive name. Now path gets filled in as we create it. That's kind of its path within the framework. So now we're on to flow and other places. So I go to my tag browser. And as you see, if I right click on a tag, the asset info is grayed out. So I can just start dragging them in. And I can get my discharge and make that the outlet, and my suction, make that the inlet pressures, and then drag over my speed into the speed. And then once that's done, I can go down below. Oh, yes. When I drag a tag in, it automatically switches it from constant to tag. It recognizes what I did there. Then I hit save, and now when I right click on a tag, I can already see in the tag browser, it instantly picks it up, that it's part of an asset. So now it knows that that flow, that pump, that suction, that discharge pressure tags are all part of that piece of equipment in the process. So let's go to the tag browser and see how assets kind of display themselves in the tools of ParkView. So when I jump over to my tag browser now, as we showed just a little bit at the last video, you can see asset information. And now it knows that this is part of pump 1. And when I choose trend, I now get a trend of those 3 tags that I chose in my trend order. So I had 4 or 5 properties, or 5 or 6 properties actually, but it only trended those 3 that I found important. Me as the designer set up as being important. Now, I can see this asset into it's more than just in tag browser. If I go right click on the tag in the trend, I see asset information, and I can trend stuff in there. So if you already have a trend that has a flow tag or a valve tag or a loop tag, You can right click and find out its asset information. Now, for example, if I choose trend all like I did there, we get 2 blank spots because that's trend's older properties, but 2 of them, equipment ID and housing material, were blank. So they show up as blanks in there because they were never configured, but it had those 2 more properties. And as a side note, if I had one of those filled out and it's just a constant value or a string, it still will trend. It's still available to use in calculations. It's just going to be treated as always having the same value. So even when you have a constant, it's still usable for calculations, for trending, for graphics, as to display that string or that number in there as well. So now we're going to look at doing bulk edits. As you saw, I created 1 instance, but most likely, definitely with pumps and valves and motors and things like that, you could have dozens, if not hundreds of them within your plant. So one of the convenience things you can do is export those records to Excel. And then you have the power of Excel to configure multiple ones, assign tags, even export, change a few things, and import it back in. So the export is pretty easily done. You go back to your equipment tab where you have your list of all the equipment you have, and you just right click in the grid, and you're going to get a export records option. And you click on that, and then that's going to, of course, take you to a file browser where you can choose where you want to save it. And I replace the one that's there, and I choose that. And then now I can go there and open up Excel and see that it's filled out my sheet. And it's kind of filled out everything. You have your type column, so you can see tags compared to constants. So you can set those values to Excel. You have the pump name and the description, and it's also filled in the node path or pump type paths, as you can see there. And now only thing it involves is you to fill out the rest with all the other pieces of equipment you would like to configure. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to offline, I build ourselves a list, and then we can go there and import that list and for other equipment types in Excel. So now we can see in Excel we have that fully configured list, and I've created 25 pumps, and I've assigned tags to all of them, and I'll save that. And then once I save it, I can close it and head back to my equipment browser and open that up and import my pump type Excel sheet. And there we create now 25 or 24 more instances of pumps in my system. And with the import, it automatically saves it. So now they're available for us to use and view in the system, each of them having different tags for all their properties. So next we want to organize these equipments in a hierarchy. And one of the things about organizing equipment into hierarchy is it's different. You want to make a tree, so you can't just organize pumps into trees. You need processes and sub-processes and unit operations to drag them into that. And that's why we include what we call the generic equipment type. So within there, you can go make instances of the generic equipment type. They don't really have any properties. They're not meant to hold much. But once you do that, you now have placeholders that you can organize into a hierarchy and now start putting equipment in there. So you can make your processes, your boiler, your power plant, your take farms, your reactors, and as generic equipment, and then organize your pumps and motors and valves and compressors underneath that. And some sites have even been making kind of multiple hierarchies. They might make one that's very process-oriented, and then maybe one that's very environmental-oriented. And a tag can be part of multiple pieces of equipment. So you're not just tied to one tag to one piece of equipment. It could be part of a motor, but also part of a loop, plus part of the environmental system as well. So we're going to go into now how do we get tags, pumps, equipment into our hierarchy. So now we're going to leave our equipment window that we've been on here and head over to the hierarchy windows. Now, first I'll show you that generic equipment type. where I've already made a process 1, process 2, and sub-process 1 that I can then kind of break down and start my hierarchy by building those. So let's go over to equipment. So when I go over to equipment, we see on the left side my hierarchy or equipment tree. And right now I only have process 1 and 2. So I'm going to pull in a secondary window here, my equipment types. So now I'm going to basically get a replication of that equipment tab or equipment window we've been looking at. And I can show you where we've made our generic ones. And then the only thing you have to do is drag and drop an equipment into where you want in the hierarchy. So I grabbed subprocess 1 that I already made and dragged it into subprocess 2. And now I can go down to my pump. And now we have all the pumps, and I can start dragging them into where it makes sense to put them in the hierarchy. Now you can do that all one by one. I can use the shift key and multi-select. If I can do that, drag them all over. I could have also used my filter bar in the equipment tree if I wanted to filter to anything specific to help get my list refined. But otherwise, I can keep using my shift key to multi-select and start adding my pumps to my processes and my sub-processes and start building out my hierarchy of equipment that way. Now, what I've basically been doing is, in a way, putting them into a hierarchy, but also giving them what is their asset framework UA node paths. And as you can see, that's one of the columns we have in our equipment tree. So with that, I could have exported this all from Excel. And then if I know how to build my paths, which I can do with a little dragging around and then exporting back to Excel, I could have actually built those paths in Excel and then made it possible to do some of this tree or node assignment from Excel if I wanted to use that magic instead of dragging and dropping. But you kind of have both options. So now that we've put our pumps in our hierarchy, let's look how you can find equipment in the hierarchy in ParkView. And basically, what did we get out of doing what we just did? How does that make itself visible in DataPark? So again, we're going to go back to ParkView, and we're going to go back to our tag browser. And once I go and find a tag that I know is part of my asset framework, when I right-click, asset info is available, then I can choose show in hierarchy. And that's going to pop open a hierarchy browsing window, and it's going to show me where pump 01 was in the hierarchy. And I can see it's under process run, same as the other ones, and now I can see kind of where it fits in the hierarchy. I could go trend tags from that piece of equipment. I could choose trend the whole piece of equipment, just like I could when I was in tags. So now I can start seeing a little bit the way my tags fit into the process. Instead of just kind of an isolated tag, I can now get an understanding of it. And when I'm here, we're now doing something with asset tags. They're not quite the same as just regular tags. And I'll spend a little more time on those in a bit. And once again, if a tag's in a trend, I don't need the tag browser. I can also get to where it's in the hierarchy just by going into the display. So retention Rs, if you're in a trend, a center line, any of the displays in DataPark, that you'll be able to right-click on a tag and then find it within the process hierarchy or equipment hierarchy. So everything we've been doing right now, we've been going to the tag browser, we've been finding a normal tag that we're used to, and then right-clicking and finding out where it fits into the equipment hierarchy or the asset hierarchy. So now let's go to the tag browser and look at the equipment tab and see how you can also browse just starting with our hierarchy and finding the properties that are in there. So again, we return to ParkView and our tag browser. And up at the top, we have an equipment tab. When I click on it, now we get a familiar view that we're used to from the asset manager, which will be our equipment hierarchy. And we can see pump 1, we have our filter bars. So if I had many properties, I could type in pressure and find my pressure 1 quickly. And it gives me all there, and I can drag them in just like from the tag browser and add them all to the trend. Now, I can also switch to grid mode. So instead of a tree, I now have all my equipment in one big grid, and now I can start searching. So I could type pressure, and now I found all my properties across all my equipment that has pressure in its property names. So there I do pressure inlet. I right-click on the column heading, and I add current value and path. So now I have columns for my equipment path, as well as the current value. So then I can go over here and type process 2, and now I have everything that's process 2 plus the current values. So right now I'm seeing the pressure inlet of all the pumps around process 2. So both the grid and the trend and the tree view have a nice advantage of a way to find things within the framework once it's built. One, if somebody just wants to browse the tree and walk up and down the branches, they can find things. Or they can go to the grid, and if they know a little bit about their property names or a little bit about their path, they can really kind of narrow down with what they want. And then with most grids in DataPark, if you right-click on the header bar, you'll find out that there's other columns you can add. And I added, for example, the current value column. So now I'm kind of seeing for process 2 and pumps and sub-process 1, what are all my current values for those pumps right now? And of course, those are all draggable tags, tags that I can drag into graphics, trends, center lines, tabular reports, histograms, and use them just like any other regular tag. So now let's go back and build a calculation. We've already built our equipment. We've used it a little bit. Now we want to go in and extend it by adding a calculation. So we're back in the asset manager again. We're using our secondary window of equipment types, and we're going to go and make a new property. TDH, or total developed head. So we're going to take our difference of our inlet and outlet pressures and scale it by a factor, and that will give our total developed head. So I switched the value to a formula, and now I'm going to type it in there. And we follow basically the same format that we do when we're doing scripted tags in DataPark. So EXPR for expression, and then we use EV. EV stands for equipment value. And there you put the property name. So this is expecting you to use the name of one of the properties for this equipment type. So I got EV pressure outlet minus EV of pressure inlet. So I'm calculating the difference between the two and close it off with the parens and put it times 2.31. So I'm multiplying it by a scale value to get myself into the correct value. And then when I hit save, you can see when I go back to my equipment tab that for all 25 of my pumps, it's basically propagated that property down and set everything to that formula. So by building one formula against that one property, I've basically now made 25 calculated tags. Now I can go save and add that to my trend order. So now my new property has been added to the trend order. Anybody that's choosing to trend my pump will see that, and it's a calculated value. So let's go see that property, which is now available in DataPark, and how it will look. So I leave that and go back to ParkView and open that up. And I'm going to have to hit reload all, so it will refresh what it's already cached about processes, and go down to pump 1, and there we can see TDH is there. And it even tells us what the formula looks like for easy reference. Double click on it, and we trend the tag and pull it in there. Now if I go to like pump 10 and do trend all, we can see that now that total developed head is added to it. So it picked up my change in trend order. So that new property is quickly available to all users that need to see it. So we've been using, first we start out using regular tags and showing how their assets are now tied to them. Then we used asset tags. We went to the equipment tab and found the property tags and started dragging them into trend. So now we're going to use type tags. So those are more like the generic my pump type pressure inlet, not tied to a specific tag, but then it gives you the ability to say, okay, now show me pump 1, show me pump 7, show me pump 12. You can then now set your contacts in kind of run mode when you're in a display. So to do that, we go back to our equipment tab. And so instead of using these equipment tags that are pointed to a specific property of a specific pump in the process, we're going to use a generic version of that property. And then at the trend level or the graphics level or the display level, we'll set the context. So to do that, you change your hierarchy to equipment type, and now you get a familiar view of that equipment tree and then familiar properties. But now as we drag those tags in, we initially don't get any values because they're not actually tied to a tag yet. We need to set the context. So go up to display, and there we have a context selector. And when I click that, it automatically recognizes my display has a pump, my pump type, and then down below it lists all the instances. And then I can click on one, and it will load the underlying tags for that into my display. I can go back, pick a different one, hit apply, see my trend change, pick a different one, hit apply, and see my trend change. So each time they're going to be loading the underlying tags in there. And that can be done from graphics and trends and center lines and histograms and XY plots, just giving you a context selector to do that. Now, if I happen to have multiple equipment types in that display, I could have a pump, and I could have a motor, and I could have a valve. I would see 3 types listed in that upper grid, and I could pick 3 separate instances of each of those equipment to show in that display. So pretty handy to help you build one display that you then can reuse and people can use to show values and see values for all the equipment in the process. So the last thing I'm going to show you really quickly is let's go in and make one more property and show how our property can have different types, like a constant formula tag for different equipments. So we're going to go back to our properties window, and I'm going to make a specific gravity property. So again, you go to the blank row with the asterisk, and we're going to go in and type in specific quality, or SG. And then I'll give a description of specific quality. I mean specific gravity. And then we're going to go set its constant. So here we actually are going to fill in, because it is going to be numeric, we are going to fill in an initial value for that. And then we'll show how you can change it for each equipment instance. So we'll put 0.997 in there and leave it as a constant and then hit save. And then I'm going to use my specific gravity in my total head, because maybe I buy pumps that are pumping different things than just water. So I'll add specific gravity to that formula and save that. So now my total develop head has been modified. And when we scroll over, we can see I have a specific gravity. And now let's say I know that pump 10 is pumping something else besides water that has a different specific gravity, and I can change that to 1.2. And let's say I magically have a specific gravity tag for pump 02, and I could go and drag that in there and make that a tag. So now pump 2 is using a tag in specific gravity, and we use that tag in the formula. And pump 10 is using a different constant value that would be used for pump 10's equations, and if anybody trends that property. Now I could also have made it a formula if I had a formula that I could do, calculate specific gravity. So there's different options that you can use when you're setting things up. Now, a final thing of note that you can use the asset framework and the equipment framework for is for what some people kind of call modeling and fast development. So you can build out a piece of equipment as a model of a unit op, and that may have 10, 50 properties, Many of those might actually be tags, some will be constants, some will be calculations. And you're kind of building your framework that you eventually plug in. Now, to be able to view how those calculations are working and how your model's behaving when you put it in a trend or a display or a graphic, you might want to just fill in constants for all those tags, because then you could see what it looks like when this is a 7 and that's an 8. And it's pretty quick feedback if you're in a room with a bunch of people throwing out ideas of getting yourself to a point that you have something that looks like it's working. And then you can see, well, what happens if my values are high? What happens if my values are low? How do my formulas work? And then that way you can build out this compressor, this reactor, this digester model pretty quickly, knowing that your tags won't even be there yet. And then later on, when tags are available, start plugging in and see how they work in a true state. So that's another use of the asset manager, is kind of a fast prototyping development of models and equations before you even have the tags, or before you even want to spend the time to find the tags. You can pull them in there. So again, thank you everybody for joining me. I hope during this presentation you got some ideas and you got some questions that I think we're available to dig in or start answering now.
All righty. Well, thank you, Aaron, for that presentation. I think we all learned a little bit more about Asset Manager, and it's something newer, so hopefully people are starting to use it or have access to it and are able to get out there and use it.
Yeah, of course.
So I see that there are a few questions in the chat. We'll go ahead and we'll start. So the first one is about constant values. So if you do set a constant for one of your Asset Manager properties and then you add it to a trend, is there a data frequency? Do you know if trend does something behind the scenes just to make sure it shows that sort of constant value throughout?
I'll have to double check on that one. I can't remember. I know you can trend them and they are a flat value, and I've used them in formulas. I've honestly haven't turned the dots on to see how many data points we have. So I know it works well enough to make sure that you'll always see the current value if used in a graphic, and that will always work in a formula. So I'll have to check on the frequency.
Okay, I've seen the same thing where it seems to persist and work in calculations just fine. So yeah, I'd be curious to know kind of what it's doing with the dots.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, our second question. Is there a recommended tag naming structure to make it easier to use the Asset Manager?
I mean, one of our recommendations is to avoid odd characters like ampersands or pound signs or anything like that. And also I avoid spaces. But then for naming structure, it kind of comes down to making sure it has enough information that if you go to the tag browser and search, you can find what you want to find. So it might be a comfort level for somebody to kind of play with, build out a sample instance of something, put it in a hierarchy, and see about the names, because you're going to want it unique enough that you can identify it as being a specific something in your process, but in a way generic or short enough that it's not overly wordy. In most cases, you can always if you're in the tag browser, you can right click on the row, the grid headers, the column headers, and you'll see other columns that are available. So you could toggle on the description column or the path column to help you kind of get closer to filter into what you're looking for.
Yeah, and you can always turn on the current value too if you want to make sure that it's kind number. You know, so 1 versus 10 versus 100 can probably tell you if you're looking at the right thing, hopefully.
Yeah, kind of a sanity check. Does this make sense? Yeah.
And then kind of to piggyback on that, I think that's part of the real benefit of the Asset Manager is once you do get things in there, you can worry less about the description or the tag name because you've said this is, you know, pump one's output flow. Like we that. So that I think helps with making it easier to find things with if your tag names aren't perfect.
Yeah, because there would be the name of your instance plus what you've called the property. Like you said, pump one with pressure outlet 2. And then that's one of the advantages of putting it in a hierarchy. Then you get that relational information too, of kind of where it fits in. And then anytime you see one and you're kind of unsure, right click asset info show on hierarchy, and you can see that it's part of reactor one or part of the dryer section or something like that. So further kind of giving that context.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Is it possible to adapt the asset manager for lab equipment?
I probably want a little more clarity on what they're looking for with that. We still have the concept in manual entry, lab entry of master tags, which is pretty similar to asset tags. Build a manually entry form for like a reactor or a machine, and make 2 or 3 or 5 instances of that separate from the asset manager. But I could imagine that people could use it for auto writing from a lab piece of equipment, especially as we go in right now, which we're in development, is expanding our kind of API or SDK to the asset framework, so that programmatically you could browse it and get values, and then extend it to the ability to possibly write values to it if it's recognized as a manual entry tag.
Okay, yeah, and we can we'll see if we can follow up with this particular question to
Exactly.
more about just trending what's in the lab equipment or possibly integrating with manual entry.
Yeah, find out what they're thinking.
Okay, next question here. Do asset manager objects behave the same as native assets and
asset framework objects? I think that one I need a little more clarity too. I'm not quite sure what we mean by an AF object. I guess if it's talking about kind of the AF objects being the what I was calling the asset type tags, and yeah, okay, got a little clarity. Yeah, they do work the same, basically the same as regular instances. You can use them in any trend or graphic. It's just setting the context in either kind of design mode that I want this one to start with a certain instance or context, or start generically and then use it. Some of the stuff on our future development list is what it means if, for example, I build an alarm against a asset type. So I build an alarm against a pump amps. Now I have 500 pumps. What does that mean? Do I get 500 alarms, or does it mean something else? Lines. And same thing, extending it to limits, extending it to other areas where we want to kind of, like we can with formulas right now, configure the same thing and have it propagate to all instances.
Yeah, so yeah, I definitely think that like equipment tags, not equipment type tags, but the tags for specific pieces of equipment, those are more or less the same as any other tag. So you can use those in displays. There's no sort of further refinement. It's really when you use the equipment type tags, which are very powerful, but need to know what they're against. Is it against pump 1, pump 2, because it's generic pump X's, property.
Right.
Okay. And then I think we have one more question in the chat. When entering formulas, is the syntax being checked? So when you're dealing with the calculations that you're building?
Unfortunately, currently now, no. It's in a way a free-form field that you're typing into. But we have in the works adding basically the script editor, the same that you can use with tags. So instead of typing in EF, EV, pressure inlet, you just drag it in just like you can in the script editor from tags, and then make it easy to work with formulas and advanced formulas, and hit the run button and do a test execution. So right now, no, you just kind of have to get it right the first time. But we're going to extend our script editor to that.
Yeah, and I can see that. That makes sense. So there's no more questions in the chat, but I have one quick question for you. So hopefully this isn't a stumper. Let's say I'm a customer out there. I've seen your presentation, and I think Asset Manager looks really useful. What would you recommend to them as like a first step on getting started? What's something that they can do to kind of begin to start using this?
I think one of the easiest things, and Rich Kane has showed it before at the user conference, is valves. We already have a valve type. Loops. Sorry, we already have a loop type in there, and usually people can get their loop sheets into Excel, so they'd have the 3 or 4 tags that make up a loop. So it'd be pretty quickly to play with that type, do the export to Excel, configure and throw in your 300-400 loops in there, and then within DataPark, without having to switch to equipment tags or asset tags at all anywhere, you will now go to any of your tags that are a part of a loop, right click, see asset information, see which loop they're part of, quickly pull up the other 2 or 3 tags that make up that loop in a trend, just right click and say trend asset, and now you're trending the whole loop. And so you're never going back to the tag browser to find out, is my output oscillating, did my mode change, did my set change? It's just a quick click, and there you have all the tags together in one trend. So I think that will probably be the first one to do, because just questions the right person, you can get that list of all the loops. And then the next one would be try to think up of a medium-sized piece of equipment that you would maybe want to add some calculations to, an efficiency calc, or something like we had there, total developed head, the difference between inlet and outlet temperatures or pressures or something like that. But really, I think the loop would be the first one I would dive into. Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be a great first step for people if they're seeing your presentation and they're like, okay, how can I start applying this and be able to use this?
Mm-hmm.
It looks like we don't have any more questions, so I think we will call that good for you, Aaron. Thank you so much for your presentation. And for everyone else, we'll see you back in 10, 15 minutes or so at 8:55 Pacific for our next presentation with Richard Chennis.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.